right. Well, welcome. We are really glad that each of you were able to come. You may wonder why you got invited. You got invited either because I know you or I know a guy that knows you. It's pretty much the way it works. About, I don't know, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe it seems longer than it was. This task force got put together called the New England Revitalization Task Force, which is now the New England Church Revitalization Network, which will probably be something else because nobody likes that name. But it was basically a group of different leaders from around New England that were concerned with revitalizing the historic, declining, basically mainline churches in New England. And this group's been meeting now off and on for about 3 years and been developing strategies. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to encourage guys and gals that are already engaged in doing this. I don't need to tell you that it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. And so part of the strategies that came out of this was to make sure that we're not only recruiting people to do this, but we're also encouraging and supporting and equipping folks that are in the middle of doing it. And so one of the reasons for this conference is, one, to just let you get away for a day out of the midst of the ministry. It's kind of like being a farmer. The cows never leave. And the same thing with people. People's needs are always there. So we wanted to give you a chance to get away. Also to kind of meet some of your peers who are in the midst of doing the same kind of ministry, as well as provide you some content that we thought would be encouraging and just kind of help you re-engage in the task of loving the people that God's called you to. So that's the New England Church Revitalization Network. The other side of this is Overseed. And the lines between the two gets blurrier and blurrier, and that doesn't really matter to you. But where Overseed started was about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and it really starts prior to that. In 1997, I was involved in a church plant in Burlington, Vermont. My wife and I were going to go into church planting. We went through the Baptist General Conference 4-day torture test. We passed. They were going to let us go into church planting. And I was just wrestling with one aspect, and that was, should I go to seminary or not? And my sister was getting married, and at the very last minute, the pastor got called out of town. I don't remember what happened, but couldn't do it. And of course, everybody's scrambling. And I'm like, well, Mom, I could do the wedding. And she's like, yeah, but we want a real pastor. And I was like, if my own mother can't get over this, I probably need to think about this seminary thing. So we decided to go to seminary based on Mom's great advice. Did it remote for a couple of years at Bethel Seminary because my wife's grandmother lived with us. She lived to be 105, and we didn't want to move her at 102. So I got to move all over. But eventually she passed away, and we decided to finish our seminary at Gordon Conwell, came down here, moved to the North Shore, and I had friends who had parents that went to this church called Byfield Parish Church. It's a small church up here on the North Shore. It's probably not small by New England size. It's about 250 people. And we started going there, and I found out about 6 months into it that it was a UCC church, which I thought was bizarre. But, you know, they seemed to talk the Bible, and I liked the pastor, and the people there seemed like Christians, so I kept going. And then I got curious, because as I got to know this pastor, he had been there at that time 30 years. Only church he'd ever pastored. When he came there were probably 10 non-Christians. They didn't meet. He was there for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, they said, hey, we'll see you in the fall. He's like, well, what do you mean? He's like, oh, we don't meet this summer because nobody comes. So he had all summer off. I'm thinking, dream job. But he began to pray, and God began to work, and God began to do some amazing things. And you fast forward to when I show up, about 25 years, you have this solid evangelical church. But I thought to myself, why would you do this with your life? That just anything older than 2 years is old. And being at a church that had a 300-year history, I mean, I just couldn't relate. I went on tilt. So I decided to interview this guy. Like, you know, why are you doing this? You know, what was the idea? And the more I talked to him, I began to realize it was really church planting in an existing building with some existing people. And I thought, that's an interesting strategy. And those weren't his words. But this all overseed started actually about 6 o'clock in the morning. It was probably a Thursday morning in the center of Dorchester as I was walking down the middle of Main Street, because you can do that at 6 in the morning. And I was down there for other reasons, and I was bored, and I wanted a cup of coffee. And as I was walking down Main Street, I went around the corner, and here was a UCC church and a Methodist church. And I thought, you put a lot of people in this building. And then I started, you know, looking around at Dorchester, and I thought, there's nowhere to plant a church here. And, I mean, there's no real estate to build a building. If you want to plant a church, either you got to either rent the school or buy some retail store that's folding. And I thought, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so God and I had a conversation for about 30 minutes in terms of what would this look like if we actually started to put evangelical pastors in pulpits of mainline churches and just started doing church planting, replanting inside of existing congregations. I thought it was a brand new idea. Come to find out, revitalization's been going on since Revelation 2. It's not a new idea. But even in terms of this strategy, if you go back and you read John Newton, you know, the guy who wrote Amazing Grace? Well, when he came to Christ, decided to be a pastor, he went in to the Episcopal Church. They don't call it that. The Anglican Church. All his buddies tried to talk him out of it. His whole career, they tried to talk him out of it. But he believed he was called to minister in these churches because he felt it was the greatest missional opportunity he had was inside the established church, not outside. Then you fast forward to A.J. Gordon, Baptist guy. You guys should have heard of him. Same thing. He began to realize that the greatest missional strategy for New England was to revitalize declining mainline churches. And so that's what he began to do. That's what he began to preach. He actually wrote a little book called When Jesus Came to Church, I think is what he called it. And it was a dream that he had when Jesus came to church one day. And he believed that you could even revitalize a church just from the pew. Maybe in 1850 we could do that. I don't think you're going to do that in 2015. But if you fast forward again to a guy named Harrell, same strategy. It's like, why are we yielding all this real estate, all this influence to the liberals in the mainline church? Why are we not holding our ground? Why are we not being missional and intentional? And so Herod Ockingay, he would take an intern every 2 years, and he'd go put him in a church. In fact, I just met with the head of the board of directors of Gordon Conwell, John Hoffman, really good names. And John's dad was one of those guys that Harrell Ockingay trained, put in a church. He got fired. He went down the street, started another church, and he taught this idea of being missional. In fact, some of his guys caught it, and they left his church and planted another church in Lexington, known as Grace Chapel, because some guy went to an existing church and began to preach Christ where it wasn't being preached, and God got a hold of those people's hearts and transformed who knows how many lives. And so it's not a new idea, but it's an important idea. And so Overseed was founded with really the goal of recruiting and equipping evangelical pastors to go into these declining churches and do what you guys are doing. And so one of the things we do is we go up to Gordon Conwell, we go to other seminaries and recruit to this idea. Because when I was at Gordon Conwell, There wasn't a single guy that I talked to that said, you know, my dream job is to go into a mainline church in the middle of nowhere with nobody attending. I don't know about you guys, but I never heard that. Until you start to talk about the missional opportunities. And until you start to talk about what's it like to go love a community and reach the community from the existing relationships, from the existing history, and begin to realize that this is a wonderful call to just go pastor a group of people. And so that's what we do. I wanted to go do it. God said no. Instead, I get to help you all go do what I wanted to do. But that's okay. I'm happy to do that.